Series 4 of the 50 Faces podcast is sponsored by Bailey Gifford. Bailey Gifford is a long-term investment manager dedicated to discovering the innovations and change makers that deliver exceptional growth opportunities for its clients. Our next guest originally wished to be a war correspondent. Then she thought about joining the CIA. Hear from her about how finance ultimately made itself known and how she now works on providing platform services for the hedge funds of the future. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Nadia Cobalovic, who is Senior Vice President at Northern Trust and Global Head of Omnium Platform Services, where she oversees teams encompassing middle office operations, back office administration, and data delivery. She also contributes to business growth, strategic initiatives, and new initiatives. Welcome, Nadia. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Aoife. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's start by talking about your background. Can you start with where you grew up and how you came to enter the world of finance ultimately?
Sure. So like many people, I took a bit of a winding path to get to finance. It was not where I thought I would land when I was young and was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I actually grew up in Ohio until I was about 12 years old, and then we moved just outside of the Chicago area. I'm in Chicago currently and live here with my family. So for all intents and purposes, I like to think I'm from Chicago. Just in terms of how I landed in finance and where I thought I would be was somewhat interesting, I think, in that I very much wanted to be a journalist and more specifically a war correspondent. I was in high school around the time of the war in Bosnia, and I was just absolutely intrigued with Christiane Amanpour, and I wanted to be here. And so when I went to college, I went with the mindset that I would become a journalist, and I really enjoyed writing. And I was very much focused on kind of political unrest and geopolitical unrest, and very much thought that I wanted to bring that to the world and that type of reporting. But I very quickly realized that I would need to work my way up into that industry and work in markets that were much smaller and what have you. And thought to myself, gosh, I don't know that that's an investment that I want to make. And so pivoted very early on to focus on political science and took economics classes that I enjoyed and felt like I was somewhat good at. So I thought, okay, well, I'll throw economics in the mix too. That won't hurt, if anything, and I enjoy that type of coursework. And so that's what I did in university and what I focused on and studied. And then I was very fortunate the year before my last year of school where I interned with the State Department and was able to work at a U.S. embassy overseas. So I was stationed in Belgrade. And that brought back this interest and desire that I had around reporting and getting involved in more of the geopolitical nature of the world and expanding my horizons. I was given an opportunity to report there, even as an intern, on some of the things that were happening in the region. The war in Kosovo was going on at that time, and I just loved it. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, this is the opportunity. I'll work for the U.S. government. I think this is what I want to do. And it brought together all of those things that I had really enjoyed in school to be. So came back to school to finish out my year, ended up going to a career fair and spoke to a U.S. intelligence agency around their needs. And they were looking, it was the CIA, and they were looking for a political analyst. And so they really wanted people with master's degrees, which I did not have yet, but I was offered an opportunity to interview and had a job offer to be a political analyst for Eastern Europe and Russia. So it was when I was still in school. So went through the whole process of background checks and what have you, ended up graduating, was still waiting for my background check to come through. And I am first generation American and come from a working class background, working class family. And so I graduated from school and I'm waiting. And my dad says to me, well, I don't know what that's all about, but you need to start working while you're waiting for this job and this thing to happen. And so I started interviewing for jobs, and I interviewed at a hedge fund. And I did not know what a hedge fund was, but thought, my dad says I need to get a job while I wait for my real job. So I'll do this. Got a job offer at Citadel and started working there with the thought being that it would very much be temporary. So fast forward a few months, my clearance came through and I don't know, I just, I had this realization. I wanted to go see, my grandparents were still with us at the time and lived in Eastern Europe. I wanted to go see them before I started working. And the feedback was, you can do that, but we'll have to refresh some of the aspects of the background check and clearance and involves another polygraph and what have you. And it was just this moment of clarity where I thought, not what I want in my life. And now 26 years later, here I am still working in finance. And it's turned into a really great, very fruitful career, certainly very different from where I thought I would be and where my interests were when I was much younger. But no regrets. Certainly do wonder at times what would have been, what would my life have looked like. But I definitely think I'm where I'm supposed to be. So that's my long-winded answer to how I got here, which was a very windy path.
What a fascinating story, though. And I have to say, I'm with you on Christiane Amanpour being one of my heroes. She's an incredibly empowering speaker, character, and just a real great role model. And I think it's interesting also that you were drawn to being a war correspondent. Obviously, the financial markets are not the same as wars, but there is certainly a volatility and unpredictability.
There's some parallels, right?
Some for sure. It certainly feels like that right now. And just one last question on that. Since you've been immersed in geopolitics, does it surprise you then that geopolitics seems to have less of an effect on global markets nowadays compared to what it used to have?
I wouldn't say it surprises me. I think it's different. We're living in a different time and a different atmosphere. I certainly do feel like the geopolitical atmosphere does have an impact in markets, but it may look a bit different than it would have, 25 years ago. And I think that the world in some ways has become much smaller, both in terms of our access to information and the impact that information can have on how we live, how we trade, how we think about ourselves in the economy and the broader world economy. So I think that, when I started out and the desire that I had to bring information really honestly to the United States, where you can feel very much isolated in terms of the impact on things that are happening in the world to Americans and how we live. I actually think we're seeing much more of that today with our access to information. So it remains to be seen how things play out here, both in terms of the short term and longer term with the shift in the geopolitical environment and our posture and the way that we're pursuing things. But it's certainly very interesting in terms of how things have changed. And I think there have been some very drastic changes.
Let's talk now about Northern Trust and Omnium. Can you describe the kind of services you're providing currently, and how is the developing tech stock and AI changing your offerings?
Sure, absolutely. So Omnium is a technology platform, supports middle and back office services across a wide range of clients. We have hedge funds that are clients, private equity funds, family offices, pensions, so on and so forth. And I would say, well, it's a technology that I've worked on and been familiar with for the entirety of my career. I've been very fortunate to have landed in a place and grown in a place over the course of my career where I've seen the development, not just in overall technology in the markets, but in how our technology supports our clients and our processes internally. So just in terms of the services we're providing, like I said, it really runs from trade capture all the way through to end client investor reporting and everything in between. We like to pride ourselves in saying our clients can focus on portfolio management and trading, and we focus on everything else. So everything from middle office services and trade affirmation, life cycle events and activity, corporate actions, collateral management, things of that nature, financial reporting, fund accounting, partnership accounting, and client reporting for our clients. So investor reporting is an example. A big part of what we do as well, and I would say this is really where there has been a very market shift in the last few years, is around data integration with our clients. So we're very much moving toward an environment where there is a view and focus on more of the real-time data integration, less kind of push and pull of information, less of, dropping reports somewhere and things of that nature, and moving into an environment where we are playing in the same sandbox with our clients in terms of where the data is living and sitting and our availability and our clients' availability to kind of access that information. And I think that'll continue to change. AI and shifts in technology have had a big part in that. AI specifically in terms of how we work and what we're doing for our clients, we've only scratched the surface, I would say. I think there's a lot of potential in terms of what we can do. And for me, the focus is on how can these changes and shifts in technology make us and our services more scalable, more cost effective, more efficient in how we work. We're living in an environment where there are considerable risks, whether it's cyber risk, geopolitical risk, operational risk, whatever it might be. And I think looking at leveraging both the technology we have and the changes and enhancements that we can make in a way to minimize that risk. I think it's difficult to fully eliminate in a lot of cases, but minimize that risk and just work toward where we can operate as the best possible versions of ourselves is really what I try to strive for. I think it's really interesting with technology because it evolves and changes so rapidly. And so it's difficult sometimes to say what the future might look like. But I certainly think that the strides we've made have just been, like I said, scratching the surface. I think there's a lot more that will come. I hear a lot when I talk to people, whether it's internally or externally, on what that can mean from a workforce perspective. And I try to bring that back to my own career and where I started out and what I was doing, which was very manual in Excel, kind of matching up accounts and transactions and what have you. And that job still exists today. It's just incredibly different. And so when I look at the services we provide and the roles that we have, I think many of them continue to exist, if not all of them. They just look incredibly different with how we leverage technology and manage information.
And it's interesting, you speak about AI as giving you additional tools to manage risk, but would you also agree that AI itself brings in a whole new raft of risks, whether it's through hallucinations or the wrong data or copyright infringement or other infringements? How do you kind of have to add a whole other layer of risk management now with AI?
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely a very valid point. And I think there are a couple of considerations there. One is what your foundational data and data architecture and infrastructure looks like. And so trying to avoid garbage in, garbage out, right? And I think that's very important. And then how you implement, whether it's AI or candidly any other technology, although this is a bit new and different for people. And so you have to think about things maybe a little differently than you would in the past. But, ensuring that, to your point, minimizing hallucinations, how do you implement models? How do you test those models? How do you oversee that? We work in an environment where our margin for error is very low, if not zero. I can't have NAV errors. I can't have reporting to investors that's wrong. I can't have reporting that's going out in the markets or to regulators that's wrong. And so it is critical to ensure that, one, your foundational data is pristine, and so that you're leveraging that information in a way to improve your chances of processing in a way that's accurate and where you have less error, risk of error. But it's certainly all about how you implement as well and putting guardrails around that information and making sure that, when you're in an environment and you think about controls and checks and things like that, and what we do, let's say today in a legacy framework, what does that look like after AI implementation? In most cases, it'll look very different. And so we need to think about that and how we minimize those risks or ensure that they don't exist from a data integrity perspective to ensure that we're not introducing some sort of, inadvertent risk into the program because it's AI. And that's where I also try to be cautious. I mean, I think everybody was talking about AI and the disruptive nature, but also the potential for transformation. And I do think we need to tread a bit lightly, especially with what we do for our clients, in ensuring that we're not being reckless in how we might be doing that. Not that we would ever be reckless, but that we are thinking about some of those things and making sure that the controls and processes that we have in place continue to be as strong as they possibly can be as we change. And to me, that's no different than, changing a procedure or changing a process or enhancing some of our legacy technologies. Still need to make sure that the controls that live off the back end of that continue to mitigate any of that operational risk that might exist.
So interesting. And just as we're dealing with the uncertainty around AI, we are also dealing with quite a bit of volatility in markets this year in particular. How has that had an impact on your clients or your operations?
So for the most part, and I'll say, hedge funds are probably the largest portion of our client base, but ultimately, whether it's even, family office or what have you, our clients are focused on risk-adjusted returns. And so we've seen some fare very, very well with this market volatility, and others maybe, not as well. All of them, it's really looking at their portfolio concentration, being able to pivot and change rapidly where they might need to. Access to data, access to information is really critical. So when I talked earlier about how some of our integration with clients is changing and evolving, where we're in more of a real-time environment, in these times of volatility, that becomes that much more important. And so, we think that for our clients, really what they're looking at is, what do their portfolios look like? Where might opportunities exist in these periods of volatility? How can they maximize those opportunities? We're very fortunate with our client base. I say this not at all tongue in cheek, but we have clients that are trading across a broad spectrum of products and in global markets where we really see a lot of different types of trading strategies. So, we have everything from listed equities, vanilla strategies, and long short equity on the platform to distressed credit to, clients that are trading crypto, catastrophe swaps, all kinds of different things. And so it positions us in a place where, one, we have a lot of opportunities to learn and grow as our clients change their portfolios and strategies and what they're focused on and look at different markets or different financial classes to invest in. And that gives us a lot of different perspective and opportunities to grow the platform and what we're doing. So I think some of those things have continued to be the case with our clients where it's not kind of just, set it and forget it, or the portfolios look very different. The breadth and depth and type of complexity that our clients are getting involved in has really shifted and changed and grown over the course of the last, recent history. And then I would say an area specifically where we're seeing quite a bit of interest and growth is around energy and physical energy. And not to, make this just a conversation about AI, but I do think the push in AI globally is driving some of that, where just the demands on running these AI engines and servers and what have you is so fast and great that looking at physical energy and power grids and all of these different things in terms of the investment opportunities has been an area where a lot of clients are focused as well, which has been an interesting shift that I would say has happened, over the course of the last few years.
It's interesting. It all comes back to AI, but I think that is the systems thinking approach.
Yeah. And I know we're not just talking about AI.
but it's we have to look at the big picture, and it does. I mean, everything is adjacent, really. Quick question about the industry you work in and the diversity in it. Has there been any notable change in the complexion of your workplace as your career has evolved?
When I started, I would say that there was a good mix of, gender diversity. And I think, like in many industries, we start to lose some of that, certainly at the middle manager layer and as you continue to work your way up. And I don't think that's shocking as we look at a lot of industries and kind of the C-suite and senior leadership. I think there is still a lot of progress and work to do from a diversity perspective. I would say I've been very fortunate in having been given and honestly worked for a lot of different opportunities that I've had. And I've had a diverse group of leaders that I can look to and kind of look up to as I think about, what my career might look like or the possibilities that exist. And from where I sit today, it's something that I continue to be hyper-focused on and ensuring that whether it's cultural diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, whatever it is, that we have an environment that is conducive to fostering that and nurturing that. I think that we are far more powerful and impactful with a workforce and group of leaders who have different perspectives. And that often means that we come from different backgrounds and have had different experiences. So I'd certainly love to see that focus continue. I just think, I'm very lucky where, I was at a point of where there were maybe many women at the table when I was much younger, and then got to a point of where there were far fewer women at the table, or maybe I was the only one. And now being in a more senior leadership perspective, I do look around and there are far more women that are also at the table, which has been nice to see. But I do think that there is work to do in continuing that focus and honestly offering those opportunities and a pathway for people to grow their careers within finance. And, to see that as a viable path forward.
I think it's interesting how you mentioned that you sought opportunities, and that drive to not just expect them to fall on your lap, but to actively seek them out. Just moving to some reflections now, when you look at your career and any ups and downs, maybe or setbacks or challenges, and were there any particular lessons you learned that you can share here?
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned that because I have had to catch myself at times where, when I would talk about my career, I would often say, I was very lucky, right? I was offered these opportunities, but as I've become more reflective as I've gotten older, I realized that didn't just fall in my lap, to your point, right? I worked very hard and I positioned myself in a place where I was always open to taking on new challenges or asking for new challenges, being willing to flex. And so, I think that I learned that people help bring you up in your career, and leaders, often tap you on the shoulder and ask you if you want to, a new project or doing a different thing or whatever it is. And that's certainly how it worked out for me. But the reality is that I positioned myself in a way to have those opportunities presented to me, or in a way of where I could ask for them because I had put in the work. And so I have tried to check myself in terms of how I talk about my career and my evolution. And have grown within the industry because a lot of it was the opportunities that were presented to me. But I think in equal measure, it was also the fact that I was always willing to do more and put myself out there and flex and, roll up my sleeve and do the hard things. And I think that certainly is why a lot of that paid off and why a lot of those opportunities found themselves to me.
So interesting. It's like that classic skill and luck divide. And I think it's really insightful to say what you're saying, because luck is not in our control for the most part. I mean, to an extent, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I think we all believe in that and to some degree. But if we're mentoring the next generation, if we attribute too much to luck, we maybe take away some of their agency to kind of direct their path and use their skill and kind of put in that effort and dig deeper, because a lot of it comes down to that. So I think it's a really interesting distinction. And speaking of mentorship and people maybe who've been influential in your life, was there any key mentor along the way that was particularly influential? Clearly your dad at the very beginning telling you to get that job.
Yeah.
But anyone else? And this does not have to be an exhaustive list.
Yeah. So funny enough, I will bring it back to my dad and some of what we just talked about. So he would often say, you can be your own worst enemy. And I think about that in a way of where you kind of have to get out of your own way at times. And I would be lying if I didn't say that I certainly did doubt myself along the way, even sometimes doubt myself today, right? And so I try to put in that work on understanding that we can often create barriers for ourselves in how we think about our capabilities or think about potential opportunities or think about the direction that we could go. And so I remind myself of that at times, especially when I'm having those moments of self-doubt. I've also been very, very fortunate to work for some and with some very incredible people. And I feel like one thing that is unique in my career and my history is that I have people that I work with today who I started my career with 26 years ago. And I think that's incredibly special. And I think it's incredibly rare. And, it's been nice to be part of that type of environment and culture and really have it feel like, not to be corny, but have it feel a bit like a second family with some of these folks who I have spent most of my adult life with. And so you inherently learn a lot, not just in terms of the work that we do, but also the impact that we have on each other. And that's something as a leader that I think is incredibly important, and that kind of emotional connection that we can have with each other. And the reality is we spend more time at work than we do at home and with our own families. And so I do think that it's important. At the same time, I, have worked with some people who I would say I look at it and think, well, that's not what I want to be. And that's been an opportunity for me as well to learn how to distinguish what didn't I like about that leader, what didn't I like about that circumstance. And especially as I was starting out with managing people and my responsibilities grew, I often reflected back and thought about what didn't resonate with me, whether it was in terms of someone's leadership style or the things that they did or how they approached things, and would try to keep that in the back of my mind as I developed my own leadership style and learned to manage and work with different people. So it's been a bit of a mix. But, honestly, I can't say that any one person had an outsized impact. I think there have been a lot of different people that I've encountered, whether it's in my personal life or professional life, where I've tried to learn as much as I can from them and try to think about how that impacts me and then how that impacts how I present myself out to the world, whether that's here at work or outside of work.
25 years working at one place with one group, that really is extraordinary. I don't think I've heard about that much. My last question is around any words of wisdom or creed or motto that you can leave us with. Anything you wish you had known sooner or advice for your younger self?
Yeah, if I think back to what I wish I had known, I guess, I think because of my background, because I came from first generation family, I was first to go to college, I often doubted myself. And I would often question whether or not I had a right to be in the room, to be honest. And I let that hold me back at times where maybe I wouldn't speak up, right? Or whatever it is. And when I look back, I think, gosh, I wish I hadn't done that, right? I wish I had taken the opportunities that were given to me in each of those times. And hindsight's always 2020, right? So I'm not trying to beat myself up about it. But I would say my advice would be, if you're in the room, take full advantage of it. And I think that people at all levels in all organizations have those opportunities to make an impact in different ways, obviously. So that would be my advice, seek out what that might look like, present your ideas, speak up, be part of the solution, how you can be a driver for change. I think that's what really makes people stand out. And candidly, like I said, at all levels. I've had interns come in and talk to me the ideas that they've had. And that has resonated with me and stuck with me. And honestly, like I said, when I started talking about my own background and some of my own, misgivings about my capabilities, to think that, there's someone who is really just starting out in their professional lives and they have that level of self-confidence to raise their hand and say, I have an idea. And I'm not saying they're always the greatest ideas, but it's how they're presenting them and having that ability to just kind of seek out how to make voice heard and be part of the change in a positive way. I think that's been really incredible to watch and see in people. And so, like I said, I would just encourage folks, if you have an opportunity, seize it.
Well, I love that advice. Well, looking at your career journey and the twists and turns, I feel we missed out on having Christiane Amanpour 2.0. And certainly the CIA, missed out. Well, the CIA also missed out, but their loss, the media's loss, CIA's loss is our gain in our industry. And this has been a wonderful story of a rich career where you continue to look at ways to move the needle for the next generation as well as for the industry as a whole. So thank you so much, Nadia, for coming here and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.